Many thanks, Honorable Justice, for making time to share some insights with us. The world is celebrating International Privacy Day, and this has been going on for quite a while now, in its 14th or 15th year thereabout. Um, this year's theme is on owning your privacy. And I'd like to get your thoughts on a few things. Now, surveys and industry reports show that many feel an increasing lack of control over our own data. And I'd like to get a sense of what you think has contributed to this seeming apprehension of sharing our data in this very connected world today.
Well, it's because of the emergence of the big tech companies. As you know, they trade on data. And when we get all these free services, the quid pro quo is that we give them our data. Mm-hmm. And many people are increasingly becoming aware of this and wonder what kind of intrusion is going on behind the scenes with their data. So I think that is part of the unease of many people. Although many people also are quite happy to part with their data in exchange for the convenience of communication through the social media.
Now, the other thing is that, there's a continued relevance of the fundamental right to privacy. And in effect, the issues that data protection in Africa and various other pertinent challenges that the countries continue to face. In your view, as we are celebrating and creating further awareness on privacy and personal data, what do you feel can be done to improve, first, an appreciation of that fundamental human right and its protection by nation states across the continent?
Well, it will help if more African states were to put into place in their own municipal law data protection legislation. As you know, in Ghana, we do have a Data Protection Act of 2012, which is a good development. I think many more states in Africa ought to have data protection legislation of their own. As you know, AU has 55 states, and I think less than half of them have specific national legislation on data protection. In Ghana, our constitution, in fact, confers protection on privacy. So data protection is a human right in our context. And the AU, to its credit, has formulated the Malabo Convention on cybersecurity and data protection. Unfortunately, only about 14 states have signed up, and only 8 have ratified it. One needs 15 states to ratify it before it comes into force. So we have a long way to go. So what I'm saying is that we should have a continental framework as well as a national framework conducive to the protection of our personal data, because that will increase people's confidence and the use of modern media, which depend upon our surrendering our personal data in exchange for the convenience of using those media.
Right. The fourth industrial revolution is here to stay. It's clearly something that the globe and indeed Africa can leverage for a lot of good. However, if you would look at the fact that we've seen the coming of age of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement and area, it will create a certain extra challenge for cross-border collaboration across the continent. How can countries ensure that personal data is transferred and shared safely within the AFCFTA?
Yeah, excellent question. And in fact, it takes me back to my answer to your previous question. Mm-hmm. There is need for an effective framework, both continental and national, to enable free interchange of data safely. And we still have a long way to go on that score on the African continent. And I think the OAU or the AU needs to redouble its efforts to encourage its member states to sign up to the Marco Convention and also to put in place individual national legislation. Because the advance of technology, many people think imperil the protection of privacy. Although this has been a perennial issue, and as far back as in the 19th century, there was an article in the Harvard Law Review by Brandeis and Warren, which spoke about the death of privacy on account, in those days, of the evolution of the Kodak handheld camera. Of course, privacy survived that. And so, as Mark Twain repeaters have said, the reports of his death have been grossly exaggerated. So reports of the death of privacy will continue to be exaggerated.
Yes.
So, but there's a tension between the technology and the preservation of privacy, and therefore there has to be a law in place to protect personal data. The use, of course, about the GDPR, Europe has put in place a comprehensive framework for the protection of privacy. And Africa has started, but we need to firm up the instruments already in place and get more adherence to them.
The interesting thing about privacy across the continent, but this is actually a global problem from the literature I've reviewed, that there's increase in data breaches, but Africa has had its fair share lately. And these data breaches often lead to compromise of personal data. However, very little recognition has been given to the requirement under quite a number of data protection laws to notify the regulator and the affected party. How, in your opinion, can we improve the notification of data breaches to the appropriate authorities and stakeholders effectively, and especially the affected parties?
Yeah, that is a national data protection agency, if there is one. And they have to police ensure compliance with their national legislation, which I'm sure will prohibit these data breaches. And where data breaches do occur, it is a responsibility of the National Data Protection Agency to fine or otherwise sanction the organization which has allowed the data breach to occur. So really, it is, again, to go back to the hackneyed theme, putting in place a framework both nationally and continentally, and enforcement of the standards and application of sanctions to those who breach the standards.
Right. So who in the scheme of things would you say is more best placed, apart from government, to help address some of these challenges as far as the awareness and the capacity to ensure that people understand data and privacy, especially on not just on the user front, but also on data controllers and processors environment?
Well, I believe that the companies involved also need to self-regulate and internalize the values of data protection and privacy. If that happens, they will have compliance officers who, without intervention of government necessarily, will see the value of privacy as an asset. If a company behaves itself, it engenders confidence in the consumer. And therefore, if a particular company is known to take the protection of personal data seriously, consumers will put their faith in that company. So I think apart from government, the companies themselves ought to self-regulate and put in place measures that will protect the data in their control. Of course, organizations like NGOs, such as our own, can help to raise the level of consciousness and awareness among companies to their responsibilities under the various pieces of legislation nationally and also internationally.
So the issue of independence is a very important one. You tend not to get that perception of data protection authorities being appendages of government and thereby not seen as independent. This has therefore affected their ability to effectively carry out their mandate and ensure compliance with key government entities that themselves are data controllers. What approaches do you think we could use to ensure the independence of data protection authorities on the continent of Africa?
I think the constituent instruments, the statutes which establish these data regulatory authorities ought to give signals of independence that will help in their work. Of course, in Ghana, we have, for instance, the SHRAJ, which is known to be an independent constitutional body, and therefore people put their faith in the SHRAJ. Equally, a Data Protection Commission exists and it should be given the image of independence such that individuals are confident that if there's a breach by government of their data rights, the commission will act to protect their interests. So the impression of independence in the Data Protection Commission is quite important because they may have to act even against government if government is in breach of the data protection laws. So I think our governments on the continent ought to strive to give the impression of independence and to formulate legislation which gives sustenance to that impression.
This is a follow-up to the data breach question I asked earlier. If
Yes.
my data was breached, for example, I would struggle to know who to go and talk to. How can we empower end users like me to ensure that we're able to demand more, either from data controllers and processors or from the independent data protection authorities to ensure that breaches are reported on time?
Yes, of course, the data protection agencies ought to have a high profile and have well-known avenues through which they can be contacted. So if there's a data breach, you pick up your phone, you call them, and you lodge your complaint, and then the system snaps into effect. That's the best port of call. Of course, you could always contact the data breacher in the first instance to complain to them. But I suppose the more effective remedy is to go to the regulator to complain about the breach by your data controller. So I suppose that the remedy lies in raising the profile of the regulatory agency such that ordinary citizens are able to identify how to reach them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, finally, as we celebrate International Privacy Day, I'd like you to, as the board chair of the African Digital Rights Hub, to share a quick word with our audience on what they ought to do as stakeholders to ensure that we are all promoting privacy and ensuring data integrity.
I would say that take control of your own privacy. In other words, you be aware of your rights, and if you are being encouraged to let go of your rights in circumstances which you ought not to, don't. And before you give consent to an intrusion into your privacy, reflect carefully about the consequences of it before you do. So basically, I say take control of your privacy and try to protect it against unauthorized intrusions.
Thank you so much, Honorable Justice Samuel Databa, for talking to us.